And hello, everybody. My name is Jay Gordon, and I'm joined by.
Albina from the Microsoft Reactor.
And welcome to this month's Global User Group. We're really glad you're able to be here with us. Today, we're going to have a great conversation with Arun. He's going to be talking to us about solving FinCrime, financial crime, and avoiding it and using Azure Cosmos DB as a tool that can really work with you to be able to make sure that you're avoiding things like money laundering, which isn't great, obviously. And so we've got so much interesting information for you. We're going to get to that. But before we do, we always have some announcements beforehand. And the first announcements, I'm actually going to be sharing those duties with Albina. Go for it.
Yes, of course. Thanks, Jay. So before we begin, I would like to quickly review two items with you. Our first one, as you see, is our code of conduct. So please take a moment to review our code of conduct. Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and our presenters. We do encourage engagement in the chat, but please be mindful of your commentary, remain professional and on topic. And secondly, we have our event guidelines. So this session is being recorded and will be available on demand through the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel in about 24 to 48 hours. If you have not been on a live stream through YouTube before, please know that you must create an account on YouTube in order to access and interact in the chat. You can set that up right now. And if you're unable to use the chat but have questions, feel free to reach out to us through the social media or meetup. And we have our today's session solving FinCrime with Azure and Cosmos DB, right, Jay?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we've got a great guest for you. Before I bring them in, I want to remind you of a couple other things. And I will let you, I'll take you out, Albina. We'll get back to you towards the end of our session. So let's just go over a couple cool things that I want you to know about. First and foremost, please, if you're interested, we have our Azure Cosmos DB Conf 2023 call for papers out. If you feel like you'd love to contribute, we would love to have you. It is a great opportunity to reach the audience that it is made up of professional developers, Azure Cosmos DB data users, all of these types of things. So please, we want you to go ahead, reach out by filling out this call for papers. We really think it'll be helpful to have your voice as a part of it. The other thing that I want to remind you is if you'd like to, you can go to our YouTube channel to see all the different Azure Cosmos DB videos that we have. If you'd like to try Azure for Cosmos DB free, you can go to aka.ms/try Cosmos DB. And you can also always find information about the Microsoft Reactor, who are our hosts for these sessions, right there at aka.ms Reactor. So I've gone and I've yapped enough today. And I think it's time for me to bring in today's guest. And that guest is Arun Patinyak. Patinyak. Nayak. Sorry, I have a New York City accent. I mumble everything. I'm trying my best.
That's
But
okay.
thank you very much for joining us. You are a cloud solutions architect around AI and data. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. I'm a cloud solution architect specializing in Azure Data and AI services, and I work in the financial services organization within Microsoft. So I deal with all the banking, insurance, and capital market customers.
Great, great. So you've got some really great stuff to show around that particular subject today. And I'm super interested in it because we deal with a lot of scary things on the internet and how they can impact our personal lives and our financial well-being and our just our overall well-being, like having things like money laundering within your organization can give you some real mental stress that no one needs. But we'll talk about that in just a minute. I want to talk about you, Arun. I always like to give my guests an opportunity to just talk a little bit about themselves. We all have these diverse backgrounds where we come from different types of technologies. We do different things. And so I would really like to learn a little bit more about you. So why don't you tell me, how'd you get to this, where you are today, which is a cloud solutions architect at Microsoft?
Yeah, sure. Right out of college, I started my career as a Microsoft consultant. I did independent consulting through different small and mid-sized consulting firms. So I started out as a .NET developer.
Hmm.
And then around the time when big data started to pick up, as a consultant, you always have to keep up with the latest and greatest and do what's in trend right now, right? So I got into big data and I did the Hadoop consulting, and then I got into data science and machine learning, and I did a few data science projects, and and then I got into one of the consulting firm where I was building a large FinCrime solution using Azure, and that's when I got a call from Microsoft. It was like the home ship calling me, so I said, "Yeah." So that's how I got into being a cloud solution architect, and I'm also a speaker. I do a lot of independent speaking. My website is like my full name or nansipatnaik.com, so you can look it up.
Sure. Why don't you? We've got the chat on the right side. I can go ahead and drag that in. I'll get that link from you before we finish up. Someone in the chat, and that's great. Are we tracking down SBF, Sam Brinkman Frade? No, that's not what we're doing. But there are some things that people could have had in place to be able to avoid some sort of terrible financial crime like what happened with FTX. And that's neither here nor there. We're not going to get too deep into anything like that. But the world is full of scary things when it comes to technology. And you sent me this really great website earlier that's from the United Nations. It's about essentially money laundering and the warnings that they give people around that. I'm going to go ahead and I'll send you that in the chat if you want to take a look at it yourself. Uh, how big is the risk for people to be impacted by, I would guess, criminal acts like this?
It's pretty big. I mean, we'll talk more about that in the talk, but there are news every other day about big banks getting billions of dollars of fine for
Hmm.
failing to prevent money laundering, because if you don't prevent money laundering and it lands in the hand of bad actors, the damages could be pretty severe.
Sure.
uh, you know it impact is global, right? So
Yes, yes.
that's
And
why
and
the authorities are strict about it, and banks are investing big time into building prevention mechanism to prevent money laundering.
yes, matter of fact, the same person mentioned it. Banks in Sweden have into the problem due to money laundering. Yeah, I mean, it's an issue with all major global banking around the world. Uh, if you're not familiar with money laundering, and I know it's a common term, but it's essentially taking money and illegally filtering it into other businesses to make it look clean. Hence, laundering. We're shoving it in a washing machine, and it comes out, and you're able to use it for other purposes. So you might have seen some interesting movies that have been focused or TV shows around money laundering. So that just gives you a little bit of background. So Arun, I know you have a really great presentation to share with us today. And while we're doing that presentation, I would really love one, if you're in the chat, please send us questions. We want to hear from you. If you go ahead and you post something in the chat, you know, we'll get to them. So don't worry, and we'll also have a little bit of period for Q&A at the end of the show. And if you really are enjoying these presentations, what I'll ask you to do is join us, be a part of this in the future. We've got an intake form that you can go to and basically submit your idea, especially if you're from our community. We don't just have people from Microsoft. We have people from all over the world who share from different walks of life, different communities, uh, things that we need to hear from you. So, Arun, why don't you bring up your presentation? I'll put it into the window, and then you can go ahead and start talking to us. While you're doing that, I want to ask everybody, if you can, I'm going to type it so I can put it up. Where are you watching from today? I want to know. I want to have you sound off. I'll put your comments into this video section once it's all ready. Arun, I'm just going to wait for you to bring your. Yep, you want to bring it into full screen, and yep, there we go. Solving FinCrime. Here we are. So why don't you go ahead? I'm going to give you some space and allow you to start your presentation. If I've got anything, I will chime in. If we have questions, I will try to save them when you're at spots. And please, hi Leonard, you're from Stockholm. Glad you're here. Go ahead, Arun. Why don't you get started?
All right, thank you. So the topic today is solving FinCrime with Azure Cosmos DB. Right? So FinCrime is financial crime. Right? So the agenda for today, first we're going to learn about what is the Anti-Money Laundering Act and what is money laundering in general, right? How banks today implement anti-money laundering. We'll talk about what are some of the off-the-shelf solutions available through Microsoft Cloud for financial services to implement AML. Then we're going to talk about a conceptual architecture. I am a CSA. It's my job to come up with architecture to implement solutions. So we'll talk about uh, a proposed solution of how you can architect a custom solution for implementing AML within your organization, or if you are a consulting firm, a solution provider, you can build this to sell it to your customer. And then we're going to talk about what action you can do today to work with Microsoft and allow us to help you achieve this within your organization. Okay. So based on a KPMG survey research that was done in 2014, uh, about 84% of survey respondents said that money laundering is a high risk within their business area. And about 60% said that they are increasing their budget by at least 10% to implement AML related solutions. So that gets you an idea of how serious the financial services industry is about implementing AML, right? And why this seriousness is there? Well, if you have been keeping up with the news, lots of big banks are getting fined in the magnitude of billions of dollars for failing to prevent money laundering. So the seriousness for implementing AML is coming from, preventing these fines, because nobody wants this kind of fine. And it's not just the money that's lost, it's the reputation. Nobody wants to work with the bank where they know uh, the bank helped with money laundering, or money laundering was happening and they couldn't prevent, right? So, what is money laundering and how does money laundering happen, right? Essentially, money laundering, like Jay said, it's money used to do a crime. The highest level of crime is a terrorism financing, right? So money was used to do something illegal, but then there was a lot of fake transactions and layering that was done to kind of cover it up, right? So the original use of the money cannot be traced back, or at least it's hard to trace, right? So that's what money laundering is about. The using money for something, but making it look like it was for something else. So it typically happens in three phases. The first phase is placement, right? This is where the money was used for something, but it immediately gets moved to something else to make it look like the money was for a legitimate purpose, right? On top of that, there is layering. So the layering kind of anonymizes the transaction, right? So it anonymizes the entities and the people involved. So the people's name change, the companies create another shell company, and they do the business in that name. So the real people involved behind the transaction cannot be traced back, right? At least that's the idea. Then the last phase is integration. So after all this is done, um, then the money kind of gets divided into different segments, and it kind of gets integrated into our regular economy, which makes it almost impossible to trace back, because there are just too many transactions. To tie them all back to one single thing becomes harder the more the number of segments are there where the money gets divided, right? Jay already shared this link with you. So this is from um, United Nations, so you can look it up. That tells you the money laundering definition, right? So we know the three phases of money laundering. Now, if we want to prevent it, there also needs to be three areas of the solution to kind of counter each of the phases, right? So what banks do today, they have something called Know Your Customer, or KYC. This is where they are trying to prevent the layering part of the money laundering, right? Banks today, by the law, according to the Anti-Money Laundering Act that's passed by US government and many countries around the world, they have to do what is called a customer due diligence on every new customer that they onboard. If somebody fills out an application to open a bank account, they have to do a research on that person to know for sure that they are who they say they are, and they are not using a fake name or using somebody else's identity, right? And that's called CDD, or customer due diligence. The second part of it is know your transaction. This is where you're trying to prevent the placement. Okay. If somebody is doing a transaction, you have to kind of check, is the transaction done to cover up something else, or is the transaction really a normal use of the business, right? So using that, they're trying to track the placement aspect of money laundering. Finally, there is know your process, right? So, and the know your transaction also is responsible for filling out few reports that banks do. One of the report is suspicious transaction report, or STR, and another is cash transaction reporting, right? A lot of the illegal activity, even the smaller illegal activities, they happen on cash. So if you are in the US, you might have seen that banks don't allow you to do a cash transaction for more than $10,000. If you do a cash transaction for more than $10,000, you have to provide detailed explanation, right? So that's part of this cash transaction reporting that banks do, right? If it's more than $10,000, they have to provide an additional explanation of why this is done and where is the money going. To tie this all together, the know your process means all of this needs to work together. So banks need to have a process. They need to have a way to audit everything that happens in the bank, and anything that they find suspicious, they file a report with authority called suspicious activity reporting, right? They produce that report and hand it to the government authorities, right? And they need to have an alerting mechanism to detect this and act on it, right? So that's these are the components that almost all the banks use to prevent money laundering or implement their AML solutions, right? So who are the different roles within the bank who are outside the bank who are part of this money laundering prevention? Well, at the very first, you have people like Thomas, who is a branch officer who interacts with customer. This is the person who opens a bank account or takes a withdrawal application and gives cash, right? They are responsible for tracking things like, okay, if it's more than $10,000 withdrawal, then they need to fill out a report. So they are the first line of defense, who are kind of supposed to track things and report, right? Then there are compliance monitor, right? So these are people who are kind of monitor different things that are happening within the bank and make sure everything is happening in a compliant manner. And if not, they are supposed to enforce the rules, right? So they are kind of the police within the bank, right? Then there is compliance manager, right? People like Francis, they uh, create policies around how to implement AML, right? They implement this policy by knowing what new laws came out, so they try to be ahead of the government regulation, so they can catch things internally before it needs to be reported back to authority. Or the worst case, they definitely don't want this to be unreported and then be discovered during a government audit, right? And then there are senior management, the executives, who have to kind of make sure the process within the bank is there to prevent AML, and all the departments within the bank are working together to work in a compliant manner, right? And then outside the bank, you have people like Jose, who are supervisors. They are liaison between the banking industry and the government authority. So they set standards of what a bank is supposed to do, right? They're set up the high level framework, and they can go and visit any bank, any branch, to make sure those standards are being met, right? And then you have people like Susie, who are the government authorities. They are like people in the FBI or other government organization, who are the people who would do last level of investigation, and if they find something, they can drag banks into court. Okay. So what is Microsoft doing in the field of preventing financial crime? Over a year ago, Microsoft introduced something called Microsoft Cloud for Financial Services. It's not a new cloud like the government cloud. It's not different. It's still the public cloud, but it has a set of services that make uh, operations within financial services easier. There are three large components to it. First, there is a deliver differentiated customer experience, which revolves around customer loyalty and customer insight. Then there is empower employees through teamwork, which is a set of tools around collaboration between employee. And then what we are talking about today is combat financial crime, right? So what's inside this combat financial crime? Well, this primarily involves the Dynamics 365 fraud protection. Right? The Dynamics 365 fraud protection was created to support our e-commerce applications, to make sure the transactions that are happening over the wire in the internet are valid, and it's not fraud, and people are not using fake identity to buy something or stealing others' credit card, right? But over time it realized that this actually could be extended to to cover a larger use case around financial crime, like uh, transaction is a transaction, right? So one of the thing about financial crime is know your transaction and know your customer. So D365 fraud protection has account protection, which does research on whether the account is true or fake, and it also does transaction purchase protection, which is checking whether the purchases were valid or not. So you can use this to do KYC as well as KYT. And then Microsoft also has compliance reporting using the compliance products, that where the reporting around the SAR type of reporting could be done for financial crime. Right? So Dynamics 365 fraud protection, like I said, has these three components. There is purchase protection, which helps you detect if the fraudulent transaction was done. There is account protection, which helps you detect if an account was created by a real person or is it fake, or whether an account is being hacked, right? Then there is loss prevention, which is a set of analytics built to detect if a fraud is happening in the entire e-commerce process. Right? So using all this, now if we have to build a custom solution to implement anti-money laundering, what would that look like, right? So, like it said, first of all, it needs to have a case management solution, right? So, you have your KYC data, you have your KYT transaction data. From that, you have to detect what's suspicious, and then you need to be able to create a case, and you need to have a workflow to manage the case. And an independent analyst can manually investigate something and determine whether it's actually fraudulent or not, whether it's actually suspicious or not, and then decide what action to take, right? And then there is reporting. So you need to report on all the transaction that is being done, all the customers that you have, and what out of those is suspicious. Then you need to have an alerting mechanism that from the report, anything that seems suspicious, the right people need to be alerted so they can start taking the action. And around all this, you need to have behavioral and predictive analytics so that you can be proactive about detecting these things. Right? So now I'd like to insist that this is a concept. So if you're asking, I can't see the chat, but if you're asking, what is this app? Can I get it? Well, there is no app as such, but this is a concept. This is how a solution can be built. And the reason why there are a lot of vendors who are kind of coming up with this solution, but the core part of what makes this solution customized to you and differentiated for each vendor or each bank is the exact data that you have, and what type of skill set or knowledge you have around pattern recognition that you can implement. It's really that part of it which kind of differentiates one AML product to another. But no matter how you implement it, we're going to see later how Azure services can be used to make that implementation easier. So you have to build a kind of a portal which has a unified vision around security profile of your customer and transaction monitoring, right? So you need to have this customer profile for KYC, where you get your customer data and you enrich it with additional information that you find from the internet and through your own research to know and have a full view of your customer. Right? Then you need to have an alerting mechanism for anything you find suspicious. You need to be able to alert and inform people within the bank that, hey, this requires further investigation. Then you once the alert is done, you need to have a case management workflow where you generate a case saying, okay, this requires further investigation, and that will be assigned to someone to do that manual investigation. And then all of those reports need to be available for auditing by government entity. Anytime somebody comes into your office and say, show me all your report, I need to audit it. So those audit reports need to be ready all the time, right? So if this is what you need to build, what Azure solution can you use to build it, right? So the title of this talk is Solving FinCrime with Azure Cosmos DB, right? So we have talked a lot about what FinCrime is and what AML is. Now we are coming to the Cosmos DB part of the talk, right? So this is kind of a reference architecture of how you can build this solution and have your custom data model and your custom logic and algorithm implemented, right? So on the left you see your customer information. This is as your customer data comes in, where a new account is being opened, or existing customer doing a transaction. So each of those are events that happen within the bank, and you need to figure out a way to capture those events and stream it into a messaging system like an Azure. There is Azure Event Hub, which is a big data messaging system to store all this message. The purpose of moving the event through a messaging system like Azure Event Hub is that it gives you that buffer you need to make sure your event is not lost while it's being processed, because the processing logic for each of these events can be complex, and it can take time depending on how detailed you want to be about processing those messages, right? So first thing you want to do when for example a customer message comes in is that you want to enrich the data, right? You want to augment the data that you get from the customer with something that you get from outside. And the processing system within Azure that's recommended for doing this is Azure Synapse Analytics, which has a built-in Spark pool. So you can do this processing using Synapse Spark. And to enrich the data, you can use many external data providers. The Dynamics 365, of course, has data provider that can give you things like whether a customer account is valid or not, whether a transaction is valid or not. On top of that, there are also external data providers like White Pages, Full Contact. These are data providers who have collected a large amount of data from social media. So you provide it an email and phone number, and based on that, they can tell you if this person has a social media profile by any other name, or does this person appear as somebody else, who is this person related to, who are they interacting with most of the time. All that information you can get from this third-party data provider. So your Synapse Spark can take your customer data, call this third-party data API to enrich the data. And by the way, another data provider can be government entities, right? So government has watch list of people who they know as bad actor, and if you have the right level of clearance within the government, you can get that data too, and that's a very valuable data. People who are already known to be being investigated. Now, once you get that data, where do you store the data? Of course, you store it in Azure Cosmos DB, because Cosmos DB is a NoSQL platform where you can store the data without a rigid schema, right? So you get a customer attribute, so first name, last name, email, something, right? Over time, you call an external data provider and you find out that there is another social media account. You need to add a new attribute to your customer model. Well, Cosmos DB allows you to be flexible in your schema, that you can start adding attribute as you discover more attributes about a customer, right? On top of that, Cosmos DB has Graph API called Gremlin. So you can get a customer entity, represent it as a node, and then, for example, I have an image here. So there is Louis is a customer. You can find out through social media or other resources where you have access to data, and know that, okay, Louis is from Mexico, Louis works at Microsoft, and you can represent this with as graph in Cosmos DB. And by the way, Louis also knows Rima and Andrew and John, and the relationship between them is that Louis works with Andrew, and Rima is Louis' manager, and John is another co-worker of Louis, right? So you can have this graph representation to better represent your KYC and know who your customer interacts with, right? All of this can be queried. On top of this, within Cosmos DB, once you store the data, your analyst might know a set of patterns that typically customers follow to do this kind of layering and to hide the transaction, right? So they kind of know the pattern, and using those repeatedly known pattern, they can build a model to kind of detect those patterns within the data, right? And you can also build some predictive models to assign a risk scoring to a particular customer and to a particular transaction. And this is your own logic that you know based on your business experience. And all of that you can build as a model and deploy it and run it using Azure Synapse Spark. So Synapse can run your model against the data that you have put in Azure Cosmos DB, build the risk scoring, build the prediction, build the model output, and store it back in Cosmos DB. And then Cosmos DB can power your live application. And this application can be your case management, it can be your customer insight, it can be your transaction reporting. All of those apps can be powered now from Cosmos DB. And Cosmos DB also has a geo replication across all different regions. So customers who do large scale money laundering, they do it across different companies, right? So they create cell companies in Cayman Island or any other country to hide the transaction, right? But you can your if you are a multinational bank, you have offices worldwide, you can have Cosmos DB in each of the region where your bank is, and they all can have access to the same dashboard, because Cosmos DB data, once stored in one region, it will replicate to all the other region. So your application in every region will have access to the same data, and everybody will be able to enter data and view uniformly across the globe. So that will help you catch people who are trying to use their international connection to hide their money laundering, right? So with that, we'd like to wrap. So we talked about what anti-money laundering is, how banks implement anti-money laundering. We talked about how Microsoft Cloud for Financial Services has built-in services around it. We talked about a custom solution architecture. If you want to take this conversation further, feel free to put in the chat. You can contact Jay or contact me, and we will connect you with the right people. It could be the CSA or the team that works with you directly, or it could be partner solution. Who that person is, we will find out and get you connected. So with that,
Well,
if you have time for questions, we'll see.
yeah, let's see. I don't see any questions right now. If anybody has one, we'll give it a minute. But while we do that, I just want to remind you, as I put in the chat, please take a moment to share your experience that you've had today watching this session. There is a survey we'd love you to take. It's code 1775. I'm going to bring Albina back in so that she can give us some goodbyes. Hi, Albina.
Hi there. That was a great session. Thank you, Arun and Jay. I really enjoyed it. So looking forward to the other sessions that we have together, definitely. And thanks for sharing the survey. So anyone, please take a moment. It only takes 2 minutes. We are striving to improve with our Microsoft Reactor. So please let us know what we can do better.
Sounds great. So we don't have any questions, so I think we're gonna go ahead and start saying goodbye. Really appreciate. We had plenty of people watching this session. It was really great to have you all. Like I can't thank you enough, Arun. I think you did a wonderful job. I learned a lot. I'm gonna protect my money, and don't allow someone to use it to do a major crime. Because to be honest with you, I ain't got time for that. I don't want to deal with that. Anyway, Arun, I went ahead and in the chat, I gave your website, I gave your LinkedIn, and if people want to get in touch with you to learn more, they can go to either of those spots and find out more information. Evina, is there anything cool with the reactor coming up?
So we do have some events coming up. If you guys want to go, you can look at the meetup pages, Microsoft Reactor San Francisco, or you can go to our website as well, Microsoft Reactor developer website. So please join us.
And we have a session next month. It should be you should be getting information about it very shortly. It's on our meetup. Go ahead, take a look at that. And once again, if you like this, if you want to do one yourself, let us know. We'll really be interested. Other than that, we really appreciate you taking some time. I'm going to play, since we're finished a little early, I'm going to play you a little promo video, and then I'm going to close this out. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody here. Thank you very much, Arun. Thank you, Albina. Thank you to all of our viewers that were a part of it. And we'll be happy to take your suggestions on anything that you'd love to see in the future. Get in touch. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on Twitter. Let me know what you'd like to hear and see, and we'll go ahead and share that with you. But until then, everybody, you have a wonderful day and a rest of your week. Thank you very much to all of our viewers, all of our guests, everything. We'll have a wonderful day. Bye now.
Thank you.
Bye. Until next time.
Bye.
There are many reasons you may want to choose Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB. Here are just a few of the big points to help you with your decision. First, Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB is a native Azure service that speaks the MongoDB wire protocol, allowing you to use the drivers for the programming languages you already know and the MongoDB tools you rely on. As a developer, I want to know that my database will always stay alive to serve my users. Cosmos DB has the highest uptime SLA of any MongoDB service due to Cosmos DB's architecture. My database should scale up and down based on my needs, not the other way around. Cosmos DB for MongoDB scales instantaneously up and down with zero warm-up period. Your users will get the full database performance immediately. This is due to Cosmos DB's multi-tenant architecture. It's easy for us to allocate new resources to your database instantaneously, and you only pay for what you use. Cosmos DB for MongoDB is a native Azure service and benefits from many native Azure integrations. One of them is Synapse Link for analytics. You can run your analytics workloads cheaply in isolation from your transactional workloads with no ETL whatsoever. Just check a box to enable the service. These are just a few of the many reasons to choose Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB. To get started, check out aka.ms/choose Cosmos DB for MongoDB and build your globally scalable NoSQL database now.